She set 2 plates on the kitchen island, even though she hadn't eaten with her husband in almost a year. The quartz countertop gleamed under the soft Denver evening light. Quiet and expensive, the kind of quiet that hurts more than any argument. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, Nora Bennett stood alone in a penthouse built for two, wondering when a marriage could look so perfect and still feel like an empty house with all the lights off. What she didn't know not yet was that one small choice, one art class 12 miles west, would pull her life open in ways she never imagined and ignite a storm she never meant to start. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. The light over Denver was fading into a bruised gold when Nora Bennett set 2 plates on the kitchen island. The quartz countertop gleamed, spotless, sterile, a surface that had never known crumbs or laughter. One plate held a roasted chicken breast and steamed asparagus. The other was empty, like it always was. She sat down alone, the soft click of her fork against porcelain echoing across 40 feet of open-plan silence. Beyond the glass walls, the city glittered in early evening traffic, taillights streaming like veins of molten red through the heart of downtown. Grant's voice used to fill these rooms. Now, only the refrigerator hummed. She glanced at the clock. 7:42. Her husband was probably on his third call, or maybe a flight, or maybe sitting in one of those private clubs where the lighting was always low and the talk was always loud. He was 46, lean from obsession more than health, a venture capitalist whose empire stretched across states and whose wife existed mostly as a line in a biography. The television was on mute. A news ticker scrolled about the markets one of his companies was mentioned. Nora's chest tightened with a strange mix of pride and absence. She had learned to breathe through both. Her phone buzzed against the marble. A notification banner glowed, Denver Philanthropy Gala, final reminder, Mr. Grant Whitaker, honoree. Her thumb hovered over the details. Black tie, red carpet, guest list attached. She scrolled down, slowly, until the line ended. No, +1. There it was again, the quiet humiliation that no one ever saw. Nora opened her messages and typed, "Should I book a car for tomorrow?" She hesitated, then erased it. He wouldn't answer until midnight, if at all. Her eyes drifted to the reflection in the oven door. A woman she barely recognized stared back. Her hair still fell in loose, dark waves, though a few silver threads caught the light. Her skin looked fine, almost elegant, but her eyes, they had lost that quick, curious shimmer she once carried like second nature. She used to teach art history at the community college. Before Grant's first company went public, before the move to the penthouse overlooking the Front Range, before she learned the art of silence, a soft chime came from her phone again, this time a calendar alert from his assistant, Mrs. Whitaker. "So sorry, seating is tight this year. We'll make sure to include you next time." A smiley face at the end, as if that made it human. Nora stared at the screen. Then she locked the phone, faced the window, and whispered into the cold glass, "Next time?" The words fogged and faded, like everything else she'd said lately. The chicken had gone cold. She pushed the plate away. For a moment, she just listened. The city below murmured car horns, distant laughter, the throb of life happening without her. Her pulse matched it, slow and reluctant. When had she stopped expecting footsteps at the door? When had she stopped setting 2 glasses instead of 1? There were days she blamed herself for being too quiet, too patient, too willing to understand. And there were nights when she blamed him for not seeing that understanding isn't the same as contentment. A gust of wind rattled the terrace door. The sound startled her. It sounded almost alive. Nora stood and crossed the living room. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, a lonely metronome in the open space. She stopped by the window that stretched from floor to ceiling. Denver shimmered below, thousands of tiny windows lit, tiny lives moving, touching, arguing, laughing. Somewhere down there, she thought, someone was making dinner for the person they loved. She pressed her hand against the glass, fingers spread, feeling the cool bite against her skin. It was strange how transparent things could still feel like barriers. On the counter, Her phone lit again, a text from Grant at last. Still in meetings? Don't wait up. No apology. No question about her day. She picked up the phone, read the message twice, then placed it face down. Her gaze wandered to the open dining area, 12 chairs around a table they'd never used. She had chosen that table herself. Solid oak, 8 feet long, handmade in Vermont. She thought they would fill it with friends, with noise, with birthdays and spilled wine. They never did. Nora walked to the table, trailing her fingertips along the smooth edge, then stopped at the head seat, his seat, and stared at the empty space across from it. Her chest rose, trembled once, then she turned back toward the kitchen island. Without thinking, she picked up her plate, carried it to the sink, and let the water run. The sound was the only thing that felt warm. She reached to turn off the faucet, but her eyes caught the sparkle of her wedding ring, a thin band of platinum, too heavy for what it meant now. For a long moment, she watched the way it refracted the light, how tiny rainbows danced across the sink. Then she slipped it off, slowly, deliberately. The metal left a pale circle on her finger, a ghost of belonging. Nora walked to the linen drawer, opened it, and tucked the ring into the pocket of an old apron she used to wear when she painted. It smelled faintly of turpentine and citrus soap. Her voice, barely above a whisper, filled the quiet. I'd rather be lonely with dignity, she said, than invisible in silk. She didn't know if the words were brave or foolish, maybe both, but they felt real. The refrigerator hummed again, steady and indifferent. Outside, the sky over the Rockies deepened from violet to blue-black. She switched off the kitchen lights, leaving only the soft halo from the city filtering through the windows. For the first time in a long while, Nora didn't feel like she was waiting. She just stood there, hands empty, heart uncertain, watching her own reflection blend into the night. And somewhere, deep inside that quiet, something began to stir. The next morning, Denver lay under a pale winter sun, the kind that never quite warmed the bones. Nora stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the snowmelt slide down the glass in thin, trembling lines. The penthouse felt too still, too curated. Even the air smelled expensive. She used to love silence. It meant peace back then. Now it meant absence. Her eyes drifted across the living room, the long walnut console, the abstract painting Grant had bought at an auction in Santa Fe, the shelf lined with architecture books she'd never opened. Every corner of the apartment told his story. None told hers. She sat on the edge of the couch and let her mind wander backward, to a time when laughter had lived here. The memory came in snapshots, like photographs pulled from a dusty box. Golden, Colorado, 15 years earlier. She was 24, carrying a cup of lemonade through the summer crowd at the Golden Art Fair. Vendors called out prices. Children ran between easels. Her booth was small, just a fold-out table with sketches clipped to string, charcoal portraits for $15 each. That's when she saw him. Grant had stopped in front of her display, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He studied one sketch for a long time, a man standing on a balcony, hands braced on the railing. Back to the world. You drew this? He asked. Nora nodded, suddenly self-conscious about the smudge of graphite on her wrist. He smiled that easy, curious smile of someone who's not yet learned how to be important. You made loneliness look like peace, she laughed. Maybe they're the same sometimes. They talked for hours about art, about architecture, about the way light fell differently after 5 last during pool, ma'am, when the mountains started to swallow the sun. Before he left, he bought the drawing and asked her to coffee. She said yes. That night, she drove home with windows down, 20 miles of road humming under her tires, a sketch pad sliding on the passenger seat and her heart beating faster than it had in years. Snapshot 2. His first million. They were still in the small apartment on Logan Street, 800 square feet. Leaky faucet, walls painted the color of oatmeal. Grant had come home with champagne and a grin so wide it made her forget the late rent notice on the counter. We did it. Nora, he said, lifting her off the floor. First million in the fund. The investors are on board. This is the start. She'd laughed, dizzy with his joy. Then he said, "I think you should quit teaching just for a while. Travel with me. We'll see the world." And she did. She boxed her lesson plans, told her students she'd be back, but she never was. She spent the next 2 years following him from city to city, hotel to hotel, learning to smile at dinners full of strangers who shook her hand but never asked what she did. It wasn't unhappiness, not yet. It was compromise dressed as adventure. Snapshot 3. His second fund, her silence. They'd moved into the penthouse by then, 25 floors up. The city stretched below like a printed circuit board. Grant's company was on every business magazine cover. She was 36, barefoot, standing in a room full of boxes. One box was hers, canvases wrapped in brown paper, half-finished portraits of people she'd never met. She remembered brushing the dust from one frame, then hearing his voice from the hallway. "Babe, don't unpack that yet. The decorator's coming tomorrow." So she sealed the box again, marked it with a black marker, miscellaneous. She slid it onto a shelf in the storage closet bottom row, about 30 inches from the floor. Then she closed the door and turned off the light. Now, years later, she found herself opening that same closet, looking for a spare set of batteries. The scent of cardboard and old paint rose like a ghost. Her hand brushed the box. The marker label was faded, but the words still there. Miscellaneous. She pulled it out, dust swirling under the sunlight. Inside, the sketchbook lay where she'd left it, 9 by 12 inches. Leather corners frayed, pages curled slightly from the dry mountain air. She flipped it open carefully, afraid the paper might crumble. Charcoal dust clung to her fingertips. The first page hit her like a punch, the same drawing Grant had bought all those years ago, a man on a balcony, shoulders caved, sky pressing down on him. Only this version was unfinished. She had never added his face. She stared at the lines. They looked prophetic now, as if some part of her had known where they were headed long before the wedding, the penthouse, the dinners with strangers. She turned another page, a woman's back, small strokes of graphite showing tension in the spine, notes scribbled in the margin, needs light. Her throat tightened, the graphite smudged across her palms, dark and soft. It felt alive. She set the book on the counter, wiped her hands on a napkin, and stood there, heart pounding. It wasn't regret she felt, not entirely. It was recognition. A whisper from the part of her that hadn't died, only slept. The apartment around her was still immaculate, silent, expensive. But the edges of the silence had begun to crack. She walked to the kitchen, laptop glowing on the island. She typed into the search bar art classes near me, Golden CO. The first link read, Community Art Studio Small Groups, Evening Sessions, Focus on Personal Expression. She hovered over the register button. For a moment, her hand trembled. Would he notice? Would he care? It didn't matter. Her finger pressed the trackpad. The page refreshed, and a soft ping sounded. Registration confirmed. She exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. The confirmation email appeared instantly, its subject line glowing in the dim kitchen light. Welcome to West Side Art Studio. Golden. 12 miles west. A half-hour drive. Outside. The first snowflakes began to fall again, tapping against the window like faint applause. Nora reached out and closed the laptop. Her reflection faint in the black screen, a woman dusted with charcoal, eyes awake for the first time in years. She whispered into the quiet, not as a vow, but as a promise to herself. It's time to learn how to draw light again. And for the first time, the house seemed to breathe with her. The parking lot of the West Side Art Studio smelled faintly of snow and turpentine. Nora sat in her car a full 5 minutes before stepping out, fingers tracing the steering wheel, her pulse quick with a nervous rhythm she hadn't felt in years. The dashboard clock read 6:58 p.m. Evening light was melting into blue-gray. Her class would start at 7. Through the glass doors, she could see people setting up easels, laughing softly. Their voices carried the ease of those who belonged. She hadn't belonged anywhere in a long time. She pulled her old canvas tote from the passenger seat, the one that still smelled of linseed oil, and walked inside. The room was larger than she expected, an old warehouse, brick walls painted white, ceiling beams lined with soft lights, the faint hum of a heater mixed with the rustle of brushes and the clink of jars. A man stood at the center, rolling up his sleeves, broad shoulders, silver threading through dark hair, lines at the corners of eyes that had seen both sunlight and sorrow. "Good evening, everyone," he said. His voice was low and even, a tone made for listening. "My name's Samuel Pierce. I'll be guiding you through this 6-week session. Don't worry, no one fails here." The class chuckled. Nora didn't. Her throat was dry. Samuel gestured toward the circle of easels. "Tonight, I just want you to paint how you feel, not what you think you should feel. No rules, no right answers, just truth on canvas." He moved around the room, greeting each student, a young woman in a flannel shirt, a retired man with shaking hands, a mother and daughter sharing an easel. When he reached Nora, he paused. She tried to smile. "I haven't done this in a while." He studied the blank canvas in front of her. "You paint like someone who's been shushed," he said softly. The words landed somewhere deep, a place she didn't realize still hurt. Her brush wavered. "Maybe I have been," she said, half laughing, half honest. He nodded once, not pressing further. "Then tonight, ignore the shush." As he moved on, she let out a shaky breath, her fingers wrapped around the brush, bristles trembling above the white space. At first, she didn't know where to start. Years of silence had turned her instincts to dust. Then she thought of the balcony sketch, the man whose back she never finished drawing, and began with a line, quick and uncertain. The strokes came faster after that. Gray curves, streaks of blue, the shape of something reaching for air. Around her, the class filled with quiet concentration, the soft scratch of brushes against canvas, the occasional clink of a jar lid. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, like rain tapping against glass. When Samuel passed by again, he stopped behind her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You paint light trying to escape." She felt her chest tighten. "Is that good?" He smiled gentle. "Kind, it's honest." For 2 hours. She painted until her shoulders ached and her wrist cramped. When the class ended, the room glowed with the strange intimacy of shared creation. People compared colors, laughed about mistakes, planned to grab coffee next time. Nora packed her supplies slowly. The canvas before her was raw, but real, a swirl of muted tones, a figure half submerged in shadow. It looked like grief, maybe, or awakening. "Would you like to join us for coffee?" one of the women asked. Nora hesitated, but Samuel overheard and smiled. "Come along, if you can. The diner down, U.S., 6 stays open late, and the pie's worth the drive." Something in his tone wasn't pushy. It was an invitation, not an expectation. She found herself nodding. The diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 1970s chrome trim, red vinyl booths, coffee refilled without asking. The group filled one long table. Nora sat near the end, across from Samuel. He listened more than he spoke. When he did talk, it was about small, human things, the way color shifts when the air's cold, how he once painted for 20 hours straight and forgot to eat. As others drifted out one by one, the conversation between them grew quieter. He stirred his coffee, then looked up. "I have to ask, did you ever sign your work as N. Bennett?" Her head lifted, startled. "I did, years ago." "How do you know that?" A slow smile spread across his face. 10 years back, I was wandering a flea market in Fort Collins. There was a small sketch charcoal, a woman's hands holding a coffee mug. The vendor said the artist moved away, never came back for her pieces. I bought it. She blinked. "You bought my drawing." "Maybe," he said, pulling out his phone. "You tell me." He scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. The image appeared under the diner's yellow light. The paper was aged, edges frayed, but the hands were unmistakable, her lines, her shading, the slight tilt of the wrist she always drew from muscle memory. "That's mine," she whispered. He nodded. "It's been above my desk ever since. Through my divorce, through closing one gallery and opening another. I didn't know who you were, but I always thought the piece looked hopeful, like someone was waiting for the world to soften. Her eyes burned. I thought no one ever saw it. He leaned back, his smile quiet. Someone did. They sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the neon sign outside flickering across their faces. For the first time in years, Nora felt seen, not admired, not evaluated, just recognized. She looked at the photo again, the lines she'd drawn a decade ago, the proof that she had once mattered to someone, even when she'd forgotten herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I almost threw all my old sketches away last week. Good thing you didn't, he said. The world's already full of noise. What it needs is more people brave enough to make quiet things. The waitress refilled their cups, and the smell of coffee filled the booth like a memory. Outside, snow began to fall in lazy spirals, catching the diner's red neon glow. She watched it through the window, the steam fogging the glass. For the first time, she didn't feel like an accessory in someone else's life. She felt like a person sitting in a warm booth with paint under her nails and a story she might still finish. And though she said nothing more, Samuel glanced at her one last time before they left. As if to say he already knew that story wasn't over. Grant Whitaker's mornings began before the sun decided if it wanted to rise. The penthouse gym was dim, lit only by the blue glow of the city through the glass. His sneakers hit the treadmill in steady rhythm, a machine-made heartbeat pounding under fluorescent silence. The screen flashed 7.02 miles logged. He increased the incline. He always did. At 46, he wore discipline like armor. 6 miles before breakfast, protein shake after, 2 hours of emails while Denver still slept. The city could afford to wake late. Grant Whitaker never did. Across the gym, 3 monitors glowed with numbers, charts, news tickers. One headline crawled across the bottom of the screen. SEC opens preliminary inquiry into Horizon Analytics. Grant's jaw flexed. That company was part of his portfolio, not his direct fault. Not yet. But proximity mattered. Perception mattered more. He slowed the treadmill just enough to check his pulse. Steady, but higher than he liked. On the adjacent desk, his assistant's name blinked on an incoming call. Morning. Anna, he said, voice crisp. Morning, sir. The gala team confirmed tomorrow's guest list. You'll be seated at the central table with Senator Kelman. About the +1 handle it, he cut in, towel around his neck. A pause. Already done. We removed Mrs. Whitaker's reservation per your earlier note. They said it was an oversight. Fine, he said, without tone. Anything else? She hesitated. There's also a follow-up from the SEC rep. They'd like a preliminary disclosure by next week. Should I loop in? Legal? Do it? Quietly. He ended the call and stared at his reflection in the mirror, opposite the treadmill, hair perfect, skin damp, expression unbothered, a man in control. Always. But the word oversight lingered longer than it should have. He walked to the window. Denver spread below him in grids and lights. The mountains in the distance glowed faintly under a dusting of new snow. Beautiful, yes, but predictable like the view of a life designed to never surprise him. On the marble counter, his phone vibrated again. A reminder pinged. Therapist canceled. He'd stopped pretending he would reschedule. The calendar was his sanctuary. Nothing appeared there without his consent. He opened it, scrolling through the neat lines of color-coded appointments, investor calls, lunches, board meetings, and there, wedged between a dinner with the governor and a quarterly review, was something that didn't fit. Thursday, 7 p.m., art class? He frowned. Nora rarely added anything. Most of her calendar remained blank, save for doctor visits or reminders he'd inserted for her. He clicked the event. The address read, Westside Community Art Studio. Golden. A notification banner slid down the screen before he could close it. See you Thursday, Sam. He stared at the text preview. Sam, just that name. No surname, no emoji, no punctuation. Grant let the phone rest on the counter, then picked it up again. The treadmill still hummed in the background, steady, relentless. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Sam." He opened the web browser, typed the address. The satellite image showed a modest brick building 12 miles west, near the foothills, harmless, ordinary, still. His mind moved in patterns of risk assessment, always mapping connections. He typed Westside Art Studio Denver into a different window. A short list appeared: instructors, schedule, board sponsors. One name matched the text: Samuel Pierce, gallery owner and instructor. Grant recognized it from somewhere. A donor list, maybe, or an event program his assistant once sent. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the faint pulse beneath his fingertips. It wasn't jealousy. That wasn't his word. It was curiosity sharpened by habit. He'd built entire fortunes by seeing what others overlooked. He walked to his study, past the framed newspaper articles and awards, sat at his desk, and opened another program, a dashboard belonging to one of his companies, Vertex Security Systems. He funded them years ago. In return, they gave him beta access to their urban surveillance feeds. He shouldn't. He knew that. But the thought came uninvited, and once it arrived, it rooted. A few keystrokes later, the city map unfolded across his monitor. Tiny camera icons dotted the grid. He zoomed toward Golden, the cluster of feeds around UI-6 loading in a slow flicker. And there it was, the small parking lot outside the art studio. The feed was harmless, public, but his finger hovered over the refresh key anyway. Snow drifted past the camera lens. A woman exited the building, pulling her coat tight. Nora, her hair, darker against the falling white, caught in the wind. He leaned closer. She paused, looked up as if sensing something, then walked toward her car. The image was grainy, her face a blur, but he knew her shape by heart. For a fleeting moment, something almost tender crossed his features, a memory of early mornings when she'd lean against the kitchen counter, sketching while he made coffee, the sound of her pencil keeping rhythm with his spoon against the mug. Then the tenderness cooled into something else. A flicker of possessiveness hardened behind his calm. The same reflex that closed deals and crushed rivals turned inward. He told himself it wasn't about control. It was about awareness, about protecting what was his, still. He zoomed in one notch closer, until the resolution broke into pixels. The treadmill beeped in the other room, reminding him his heart rate had dropped. He turned back toward the noise, grabbed his phone, and forced a laugh that no one heard. He'd ask her later, casually, about the class, about Sam, maybe even show interest. He was good at pretending interest, but beneath the calculated poise, the thought replayed like a faint storm cloud forming at the horizon, a man she saw often enough to be on a first-name basis. Outside the window, the morning had turned to full light, sharp and clear over the Front Range. Grant watched it rise, jaw tight, chest still. The city looked the same as always. But something inside him had shifted the smallest tremor in a man who built his life on unshakable ground. He closed the laptop, checked his reflection one more time, and straightened his tie. To anyone else, he looked invincible. Only he knew how quietly the weather was changing. The next Thursday afternoon, flakes of old snow clung stubbornly to the curbs along West Colfax, melting into thin gray ribbons that shimmered in the weak winter sun. Nora tugged her coat closer as she pushed open the door of the little coffee shop Samuel had mentioned, a narrow place wedged between a locksmith and a barber. The kind of shop you'd miss if you blinked. Inside, warm air wrapped around her, thick with the smell of espresso and cinnamon. A string of Edison bulbs hung low from the ceiling, casting amber light across mismatched tables. A couple of students huddled by the window, laptops glowing, while an older man in work boots sat at the counter reading the Denver Post. Everything felt lived in, unpolished, human. Samuel wasn't there yet. She stepped into line, rubbing her chilled hands together. The chalkboard behind the bar listed drinks in looping handwriting: Rocky Mountain Mocha, Foothills Latte, Cowboy Black. She smiled despite herself. When it was her turn, she ordered a simple drip coffee and reached for her card. "Swipe it again," the barista said, chewing gum loudly. Nora blinked. "Oh, sure." She swiped. The machine beeped. "Declined," the barista announced, louder this time. Glancing at the line forming behind Nora, heat crept up Nora's neck. "It should work. Can we try one more time?" The barista sighed theatrically, tapped a few buttons, and angled the screen toward her. "Go ahead." Third time's a charm, but it wasn't. The beep was sharper, final, the kind of sound that cuts through the room. People behind her shifted impatiently. A woman with a stroller leaned left to see what the holdup was. Nora felt her throat tighten, her breath thinning. She knew the account had money. She knew this shouldn't be happening, but her fingers trembled anyway. Searching her bag for cash, she wasn't sure she had. She hated that feeling, the spotlight of inconvenience, the silent judgment of strangers. She wanted to disappear into the floor. $9.75, the barista said, tapping the counter. "Next, please." Before Nora could protest, a voice spoke up behind her. "I've got it," Samuel said gently. She turned. He stood with snow still melting on the shoulders of his coat, hair wine-tousled, expression calm, no pity, no performance, just presence. He handed the barista a 20 and put the extra toward the next vet who walks in, he added. The barista shrugged, counted change, and moved on. What caught Nora wasn't that Samuel paid, it was how he paid. He didn't look at her to make sure she noticed. He didn't put a hand on her back or say some line meant to soothe. He spoke to the barista, not to the room. His eyes never flickered with superiority or savior-like charm. It wasn't rescue. It was respect. Nora steadied her breath. I had money on that card. I don't know what happened." He gave a small smile. "Machines glitch more than people do." "Still," she said softly. "Thank you." "Sit with me," he replied, nodding toward a booth near the window. "I only have about half an hour before I need to pick up a shipment at the gallery." They settled into the warm vinyl seat, the window beside them fogging from the heat inside. Outside, traffic crawled slowly along Colfax, headlights smearing into smudges against the glass. Samuel wrapped both hands around his mug. "You live downtown, right near Union Station," she said. "Grant likes the view." "And you." She hesitated. "I used to love high places. Now, I'm not sure if I love the view or just the idea of escape." Samuel didn't push. He sipped his coffee, eyes thoughtful. "I grew up in Highlands, before it got trendy. My parents' house had a tiny porch where you could smell the rain long before it arrived." She smiled faintly. "I remember that smell. The way the air changes metallic but soft." "Exactly," he said. "Rain over red rocks is the best. You ever been there for a storm?" "A long time ago," she said, tracing a finger along the rim of her cup. "Before life got busy." "Busy," he echoed, tilting his head. That word covers a lot, doesn't it? She looked out the window, more than people admit. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It felt like a space they shared, not a space they avoided. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to a page scribbled with paint notes. "Ever prime a canvas with gesso mixed with a drop of raw umber?" he asked. "Gives the whole thing a warmer base." She chuckled. "I used to do that back when I didn't know what I was doing. That's the best time to experiment," he said. "Before you start worrying about doing it right." The conversation drifted from the color of sunrise over the Platte River to how Denver neighborhoods had changed, to the strange comfort of art supply stores. She told him about a tiny shop she loved in college, where the owner let her test brushes on scrap paper. He told her about the gallery he opened after his divorce, how he hung the first show alone at 2 a.m. and cried when the lights came on. He laughed at himself after saying that. Nora didn't. She understood. "Eventually," he said softly, "I'm glad you came to class. You have a good eye." "No," she said. "I have practice from a life I stopped living." "That still counts," he said. "Practice only disappears if you let it." She looked up, and for the first time, let herself meet his eyes fully. They were steady. A gray blue touched with something warm, not romantic, not suggestive. more like recognition, as if he saw the parts of her she hadn't shown anyone in years. A sudden rush of emotion bubbled up light, unexpected, startling. She laughed, not politely, not carefully, a real laugh, the kind that escaped before she had time to hide it. It startled her bright and clean, sharp in the quiet booth, like a porch light flicking on after a long blackout. Samuel blinked, then smiled softly. "There it is," he said. "I wondered if you still had that sound." Nora covered her mouth, embarrassed and delighted all at once. "I haven't laughed like that in too long," he said gently. "Yes, too long." Outside. The snow slowed. Inside. The coffee shop hummed with life-soft music, clinking mugs, a little burst of warmth in a cold world. And for the first time in what felt like years, Nora wasn't thinking about her silence. She was thinking about her voice, the one she hadn't used, the one that had just found its way out again. When they finally stood to leave, Samuel held the door for her. The wind was sharp, bitter, but she felt strangely warm. As she walked toward her car, she realized something small but seismic. She didn't feel invisible, not tonight. The Grand Hotel on 16th Street shimmered under a curtain of white lights, the kind strung up for fundraising season, soft, elegant, intentionally flattering. SUVs pulled up in a steady flow, doors opening to reveal tailored suits, glittering gowns, and people who practiced their smiles in boardroom mirrors. Nora stepped onto the salted sidewalk, the cold nibbling at her ankles. Her navy dress wasn't flashy. She'd chosen it precisely because it wouldn't stand out. She'd kept her makeup light, her hair pinned back in a soft twist. The shawl around her shoulders fluttered as she walked toward the entrance. The gold-lettered banner overhead reading Whitaker Foundation Annual Impact Gala. Her name wasn't on the banner, but she wasn't here for that. She was here because Grant had promised. "We should be seen together," he'd said. Optics matter. She'd smiled at the time. Now, she wasn't sure why. Inside the hotel lobby, warmth spilled from towering fireplaces. Crystal chandeliers glittered like frozen fireworks. Guests drifted toward the ballroom, champagne already in hand. She joined the line at the check-in table, heart beating a little faster. A young volunteer with a tablet glanced up. "Name Nora Whitaker," she said, smoothing the front of her dress. The volunteer typed, then frowned. One moment. Nora waited, fingers tightening around her shawl. Another tap, another scroll. "Could you spell it?" the woman asked. Nora spelled it, more scrolling. A pause. I'm sorry. I only see a solo reservation for Grant Whitaker. No +1. Nora blinked. There must be a mistake. I'm his wife. The volunteer swallowed, suddenly cautious. She waved over a PR rep, a polished woman in a fitted blazer and headset. The rep leaned close to the tablet, then closer to Nora, lowering her voice just enough to feel intimate, but not enough to feel kind. "It's investor optics," the rep whispered. "Tonight's seating is strategic, very tight. I'm sure it was just an oversight." Oversight. That word again. Nora's stomach nodded. "But my husband invited me," she said softly. The rep offered an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker, security will escort you to the lobby while we verify." Security. As though she were a risk. Or, worse, irrelevant. Two uniformed men approached, not unkind but firm. "This way, ma'am." The room spun, heat rising to her cheeks. People glanced her direction. A few recognized her. None stepped in. Her heels clicked loudly on the polished floor as she followed them out of the ballroom, past the lobby bar, past the gilded elevator doors. The farther they walked, the smaller she felt, a woman shrinking inside her own life. Outside, the winter air slapped her across the face. The revolving door whispered shut behind her. Lights blurred. Breath clouded the night. She wrapped the shawl tight, holding back the sting at the corner of her eyes. She wasn't angry yet, just hollow. Then a voice behind her said, "Nora." She turned. Samuel stood a few feet away, coat zipped, hair tousled from the wind. His eyes moved over her face, not in pity, but with concern so subtle it steadied her. "How did you?" she began. "Delivering pieces for the silent auction," he said. "I saw you come out." The shawl slipped from her shoulder. He reached gently to drape it back, not touching her skin, only fabric. He didn't ask what happened, didn't press, didn't make the moment worse by naming it. He simply said, "Do you need a ride?" The dignity of it, the quiet offering without spectacle, undid her. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice cracked on the last word. Samuel didn't argue. He opened his car door anyway, the interior light spilling out like a small, warm refuge. "Come with me," he said. "There's a pop-up show in 5 Points tonight. Local artists, small crowd, the kind of place where people don't care about seating charts." She let out a breath, shaky, but real. Her fingers brushed the edge of the shawl again. She nodded. They walked together down the sidewalk, snowflakes catching in the beams of streetlights. Nora felt the cold harden into something sharper, not just pain, anger, not at Samuel, not at the volunteer, at the man who had promised to stand beside her and had erased her instead. A camera clicked. A bright flash popped behind them. She stopped. Samuel instinctively stepped half a pace in front of her, not blocking her, but shielding her from the sudden burst of light. A man with a long-lens Nikon lowered his camera. "Whitaker Foundation. Right mind if I get one more." "No," Samuel said calmly, placing a hand on the door of his car. "We're leaving." The photographer backed off, but Nora knew how this game worked. One photo was enough. A wife escorted out of a gala. Walking away with another man, the image would write its own headline. Samuel held her gaze, steady. "You sure you're all right getting in?" She realized he wasn't asking if she was okay emotionally. He was asking for consent for her choice. After the night she'd just endured, the respect in that question felt like oxygen. She nodded once. Yes. They stepped inside, the heater humming softly. As they pulled away from the curb, she saw the ballroom lights reflected in the side mirror, golden, distant, indifferent. She didn't look back again. She wasn't ready to call it anger, but something in her had begun to harden, sharpen, awaken, and the night was far from over. Grant Whitaker woke to the sound of his phone vibrating against the marble counter. No ringtone, no alerts, just that low, persistent buzz that meant a message had bypassed filters tagged urgent by someone who believed urgency mattered more to him than sleep. He checked the time. 2:03 a.m. His chest tightened. Nobody contacted him at 2 a.m. unless something was burning. He slipped out of bed without waking the empty space beside him, the side where Nora had once slept, before she moved to the guest room just to try something different. He'd told himself it was temporary. He'd told himself everything was temporary. In the kitchen, the fridge hummed in the dark. The city outside blinked in distant towers of blue and white. He unlocked the phone. "Have you seen this circulating in investor circles? Damage control needed by morning. You need to respond before the board does." The final message contained a link. Grant tapped it. The video loaded instantly. It was shaky cell phone footage, illuminated by the hotel's golden façade. There was Nora, wrapped in her shawl, standing stiffly as two security guards ushered her toward the exit. The camera zoomed in too close, too cruel, catching the moment she stepped into the cold. A second angle, from another guest's phone, caught her walking away with a man, Samuel. The clip ended, then rewound automatically, looping like a wound reopening. Grant's jaw locked so tight he felt something ache behind his teeth. He replayed it, and again, 7 times in total. Each time, he saw something new. The stiffness of Nora's shoulders, the stunned silence in her steps, the way Samuel positioned himself near her, not touching, not claiming, but present. Present in a way Grant hadn't been in years. A heat rose through Grant's chest, hot enough to burn. It wasn't jealousy. That would have been simpler, cleaner. This was shame, exposure, humiliation weaponized by a world that had always expected him to be unshakable. His wife escorted out. His wife walking away with another man. And the entire hotel watching. He closed the video, then opened it again. 3 more times. The rage curled inward, coiling around the one truth he refused to voice. She had looked hurt, not angry, not dramatic, just hurt. He couldn't remember the last time he'd noticed her hurt. He grabbed his keys. It was a 14-mile drive from downtown to 5 Points. The kind of drive he could do blindfolded. But tonight, each streetlight felt like a pulse in his temples. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles blanched. He shouldn't be doing this. He told himself that twice, then sped through the next yellow light anyway. At the edge of the arts district, music spilled from a converted warehouse. A pop-up show, the kind artists whispered about in circles he never walked in. He parked across the street and stepped out, cold air knifing through his tailored coat. His breath fogged in the air. Inside the open doorway, he saw her, Nora. Her shawl still draped over her shoulders, but her posture lighter now. Her cheeks tinged pink from warmth, not cold. She stood under a string of cafe bulbs that haloed her in soft gold. A small crowd gathered around a piece hanging on the wall, a charcoal sketch by a local artist. Nora pointed at the shading with gentle enthusiasm, explaining something to a gray-haired couple beside her. They laughed. She laughed back. Grant froze. It wasn't the laugh that gutted him. It was the expression right after, a softness, a release, a sense of being entirely, irrevocably present. Samuel stood a few feet away, chatting with another exhibitor, but every so often, he glanced toward Nora with quiet attentiveness, not possessive, not invasive, just aware. Grant felt something crack beneath his ribs. He stepped back into the shadows, the glow of the cafe bulb staining the ground like spilled honey. He watched her for a long minute more. Every gesture cut deeper. She looked alive. Alive in a way she rarely had with him. Alive in a way he didn't know how to name. He got back in his car. He didn't drive immediately. He just sat there, hands slack on the wheel, breath fogging the windshield as shame settled over him like a second winter. The penthouse was dark when he returned. He didn't turn on a single light. He sat at the edge of the living room, the glass wall framing the quiet sprawl of Denver below. He didn't pour a drink, didn't pace. He just waited. The clock on the microwave read 3:41 a.m., then 3:52, then 4:06. The door finally clicked. Soft footsteps. A pause. Nora entered cautiously, her silhouette framed by the hallway's faint glow. She startled lightly when she saw him sitting there. "Grant," she whispered, tightening her shawl. He didn't answer immediately. His voice, when it came, was low, unsteady, edged with something he hadn't felt in years. "Who is he?" The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They hit the air with the force of a slammed door. Nora froze. Just like the clip. Just like the hotel. Still, he stepped forward once. "Tell me." But there was something else behind the question. Fear, shame, the awareness that he had stopped looking long before someone else did. For a heartbeat, the space between them held every silence of the last 4 years. And then, she inhaled, but she didn't answer. Not yet. The pause between them sharpened, hanging tremulous and unresolved, the breath before truth, the breath before breaking. The night waited with them. The kitchen felt colder than the rest of the penthouse, as if the marble counters had absorbed years of silence. Nora placed 2 mugs on the table, steam curling softly in the dim light. Chamomile for her, black tea for him. They sat across from each other like 2 witnesses preparing to testify. Grant didn't touch his mug. She did. Her hands wrapped around it not for warmth, but for steadiness. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was something worse for him, steady. "I've been alone with you for 8 years. He flinched, almost imperceptibly. The kind of flinch a man makes when truth hits him harder than accusation. "Nora," he began, leaning forward, hands clasped. "You know what the last decade has been? The pressure, the funding cycles, the regulatory grant," she said quietly. "I didn't ask for a report." He looked down. She continued, her tone calm, almost clinical. You've built a life full of obligations, full of noise, full of crisis, but none of them had my name on them. That's not fair, he said. I provided, I protected. Everything I did was for the life you wanted. She finished. He swallowed. She didn't stop. I needed presence, Grant, not perfection, not money, just you. Her eyes lifted, soft but unwavering. I needed someone to sit across from me and listen. One unhurried dinner a week. One night where the phone stayed face down, eye contact, a question that wasn't transactional. I tried, he whispered. No, she said gently. You meant to... There's a difference. A tremor passed through him. He straightened defensively. I can fix this, he said. Whatever this drift is, I can fix it. She watched the way his jaw set, the old armor sliding back into place. And for the first time, she felt tired of trying to crack it open. I'm not looking for fixing, she said. I'm looking for honesty. Well, then be honest, he snapped. Who is he, Silence? She held his gaze, not hostile, simply steady. He's my art instructor, and my friend, nothing more. That's not what the photos looked like. Photos show proximity, not meaning, she said. You should know that better than anyone. He exhaled sharply, knuckles whitening. I want you to stop the class. The air between them froze. She set her mug down slowly. Absolutely not. His head jerked. Nora. No, she said again, firmer this time, but still quiet. That class is the only thing that feels like oxygen right now. You're choosing him. I'm choosing myself. The words landed like a stone in water, quiet, deep, rippling. For a moment, neither spoke. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked faintly down the hall. Grant leaned back, arms crossed. So, this is it. You're done. No, she said. I'm not done. But I'm changing the terms. He frowned. Terms? She nodded. We're doing a 30-day separation. His face drained. What? Same roof, different rooms, different routines? She folded her hands. No pretending, no performative dinners for your board, no photos, no gala seats, just space for both of us. And after 30 days, his voice cracked. We reassess. With a therapist. Or there is no after. The sentence was soft, but final. Grant's breathing quickened. You're giving me an ultimatum. No, she corrected. I'm giving you a boundary. Something I should have set years ago. He pushed away from the table, pacing the kitchen tile. Do you have any idea what the timing looks like? The SEC inquiry my entire year is about to explode. She stared at him, heart aching at the familiar refrain. Always something. Always another crisis. Always another reason she came second. I'm sorry the timing is inconvenient for your reputation, she said, but the timing has been devastating for my life. He stopped pacing. His breath fogged the dark window behind him. Nora, I love you, he said, voice breaking. Doesn't that matter? It matters, she whispered. It just isn't enough. He closed his eyes, hands bracing the counter as if the weight of the moment might knock him over. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted fear, giving way to something like bewildered understanding. And what about your friend? He asked bitterly. Does he know you're doing this? It's not his business, she said, and I'm not running to him. I'm stepping back from you. He shook his head. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to know, she said. You just have to try. Without shortcuts, without deflection. Her voice softened, breaking at the edges. I don't want to leave, Grant, but I can't stay the way things are. A long silence. He walked back to the table, but didn't sit. He hovered, as though unsure whether he still had the right to take the chair across from her. Finally, he nodded one small, reluctant, almost childlike nod. 30 days, he said, voice low. 30 days, she repeated, and therapy, and therapy. Another silence followed, but it felt different, not empty, not sharp, just suspended like the air right before the first snowflake falls. Nora lifted her mug again, though the tea had gone cold. Grant stared at his untouched cup, steam drifting upward between them like a fragile truce. He opened his mouth to say something else, something half-formed, half-needed, but the words didn't come. Not yet. The night settled around them, thick with the things still unspoken, and in that stillness, one truth pulsed quietly. They were finally beginning the conversation. They should have started years ago. The next morning, the penthouse felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the fact that she'd really slept for the first time in months. Or maybe it was simply the truth of last night settling into the walls, reshaping the air, 30 days, a boundary, a promise to herself. Nora stood at the end of the hallway, staring at the door of the spare bedroom, the room she used to pass without thought, the room that once held pristine guest bedding, unused throw pillows, and a lamp that hadn't been turned on since the decorator staged it. Today, it was going to become something else. She pushed the door open. Sunlight spilled across the floorboards, clean and bright, the kind that shows every flaw and makes even dust look sacred. The room measured 12 feet across. She'd measured it twice last night, pacing the space barefoot, imagining shelves, canvases, color. This room wasn't just empty. It was waiting. She dragged out the old drop cloths from the hall closet, laying them across the floor like a ritual. Mason jars lined the windowsill, each one rinsed clean, ready for brushes. She opened the window and breathed in the winter air, crisp, pure, so unlike the stale perfection of the rest of the penthouse. For once, she felt the room inhale with her. She unpacked her old box of supplies, tubes of dried paint, worn brushes, sketchbooks full of charcoal ghosts. She smiled softly at each rediscovery, like greeting former versions of herself. The room slowly filled with the gentle clatter of glass and wood, the scent of gesso, a life returning. A knock sounded from the front door. Nora wiped her hands on her jeans and opened it. Samuel stood there, holding a cardboard box taped neatly at the corners. Snow dusted his shoulders. His cheeks were pink from the cold. He didn't greet her with pity or overstepped warmth, just a small, genuine smile that didn't assume anything. "I brought something for your studio," he said. She stepped aside. "You didn't have to." "I know," he replied, "which is why I did." They carried the box to the spare room. Nora sliced the tape carefully. Inside lay an unexpected treasure archival paper wrapped in tissue, a set of 8 flat brushes, a glass palette, and a tin of charcoal pencils she remembered admiring weeks ago. "Oh," Nora breathed. "Sam, this is too much." "It's not a gift," he said gently. "It's a nudge." She lifted one of the brushes brand new, bristles perfectly aligned, wood smooth under her fingers. A rush of emotion tightened her throat. "Samuel," she whispered, "I can't accept all this. Please." He hesitated, not awkward, just thoughtful. Then he reached into the box and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table she'd dragged from the hall. "It comes with context," he said. She unfolded the paper inside. A stack of receipts, community center rent, past due utilities, donations logged under a pseudonym, M. Calhoun. Nora frowned. "This is the art center's rent." He nodded once. "You've been paying it?" she asked. "Not all of it," he said, "but enough to keep the lights on." She stared at the receipts again, her heart thumping. "Why the pseudonym? Because it wasn't supposed to be about me." His voice softened. "Places like this, rooms where people can breathe again. Someone paid for mine once. I couldn't repay them, so I paid it forward." She looked up sharply. "Sam, I didn't do it to impress you," he added, almost shy. "I didn't even know you then. I believe in doors that stay open, even for people who haven't walked through them yet." Her eyes warmed. "It matters," she said, voice trembling slightly. "More than you know." He shrugged lightly, as if uncomfortable with gratitude. "I figured if you were going to build a studio, you deserve to start with real materials, not leftover scraps from a past life." Nora touched the smooth spine of the archival pad. She felt something inside her settle and expand at the same time. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel stepped back, giving her space. "I should let you work," he said quietly. "This room's about to become something good." Before he turned to leave, she caught his sleeve, a small, instinctive gesture, but sincere. "I'm glad you're part of this chapter," she said softly. He met her eyes, warm and steady. "Just make sure the chapter's yours." And then he left, closing the door without a sound. The room felt different again now, not just bright, but alive. Her hands itched for a brush. She set up the easel facing the window, pulled her hair into a messy knot, and dipped her brush into the first thin wash of color. Warm umber, her favorite beginning. She hesitated only once, then touched bristle to canvas. Wide strokes at first, then slower ones. The outline of a table. A woman sitting with her hands folded. 2 plates, 1 chair pulled out, the other empty. The painting grew beneath her touch like a memory forming in real time. She didn't paint bitterness. She painted truth, a quiet room, a quiet ache, and a woman beginning to take up space again. Hours passed without her noticing. The winter sun crawled across the room, painting her studio in shifting gold. When she stepped back, breath catching, she whispered the title aloud, not for the world, but for herself. Woman at a table with 2 plates. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was hers. And as she stared at it, brush still warm in her hand, another truth rose gently, slow and certain as dawn. This was only the first. Grant Whitaker stood in his office, staring at the document that had just been dropped on his desk. A regulatory subpoena, not a question, not an inquiry, a formal demand, the kind that meant someone, somewhere, was preparing to pry open the walls he'd spent a decade building. His pulse thudded in his throat. The skyline outside his window flickered with early morning clouds rolling over the Front Range. But he barely registered the beauty. All he saw was the cracking lines spreading through the life he'd held together with spreadsheets and more discipline. He reached for the phone. "Get legal," he told his assistant, "and call the crisis PR team. I want them in the conference room in 10. The call ended. His reflection stared back at him in the glass shoulders, rigid, tie already crooked. Control. He just needed control. His gaze fell to the other object on his desk, Nora's painting. Or rather, the photo of it. He'd taken it weeks ago, without telling her, on a morning when she'd left the door to her studio cracked open. He had stood there, framed by shadows, watching her brush move in soft, deliberate arcs, watching her come alive in a way she hadn't in front of him in years. Woman at a table with 2 plates. He didn't understand it, but he understood what it meant. She was halfway gone. That same ache, shame, fear, possession hit him again. Harder this time, as if the subpoena and the photo were 2 halves of the same unraveling. He could lose everything, his company, his marriage, the version of himself he'd built like a fortress. He gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening. Then, a thought cracked open inside him. A gesture, a grand one, a signal to her, to the world, to himself. Proof that he saw her, proof that he was willing to celebrate her. There was no pause, no breath, no moment for wisdom to intervene. He acted the way a drowning man reaches for the closest branch recklessly, desperately. He called the PR team back. "Change of plan," he said. "I want a billboard." A brief silence on the line. "A billboard, sir." "Yes." "Off I-25, 20-foot, digital, high rotation. I want Nora's painting on it. Pull the image from her Instagram." Another pause. And the caption they asked. He didn't hesitate. "My wife, the artist." He could almost hear the raised eyebrows in the room on the other end of the line. "But sir, do we have permission?" "Do it now," Grant snapped, "and send me the proof in the next hour." He hung up before they could argue. He didn't consider what Nora would think. He didn't consider that the painting wasn't his to use. He didn't consider that what he meant as admiration would feel like control in a 10-story format. He just needed to win something today, to pull one thing back from the brink, to show the world, especially the one whispering in investor circles, that he cherished his wife, that there was nothing broken in his life he couldn't fix. 2 hours later, in a small community art class lit by rows of soft bulbs, Nora bent over a student's canvas. "Try loosening the wrist," she murmured, guiding the young woman's brush. "Let the paint move before you decide where it needs to land." The studio smelled of citrus cleaner and linseed oil. Samuel was across the room, prepping a still life setup. They were halfway between assignments when Nora's phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. Her students whispered. 2 of them exchanged glances. One girl raised her phone to show her friend. Finally, someone said it out loud. "Nora, did you see this?" She frowned. "See what?" The girl turned her phone toward her. A billboard, 20 feet tall. Her painting woman at a table with 2 plates blown up across the entire screen. Every brushstroke magnified until it looked like a wound exposed. And the caption, "My wife, the artist, G." Yow. A sharp rush of heat flooded her cheeks. Samuel glanced over, eyes narrowing. Nora. She stepped outside, the cold air hitting her lungs like glass. The notifications rolled in texts from old friends, silent question marks from her sister, photos from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Her phone vibrated again. A message from Grant. "Thought you might like the surprise. It went live this morning. We'll talk later." Her knees weakened. She steadied herself against the brick wall of the studio. Surprise. It wasn't a surprise. It was a spectacle. He had taken something intimate hers and turned it into a billboard without asking, without thinking, without understanding. It felt like a theft dressed as affection. She unlocked her car and drove, not fast, not erratically, just far enough to clear the city haze until the highway opened in front of her. There it was, high above the road, enormous, loud, unmistakable, her art, dragged into the sky like an announcement she didn't authorize. She pulled onto the shoulder, hazards blinking. Her breath fogged the windshield as she stared up at the billboard. Cars roared past. Cold seeped through the windows. Her eyes stung, not from sadness, but from the sudden clarity pressing against her ribs. Grant didn't want partnership. He wanted optics. He wanted possession. He wanted the world to see a version of them he could control. This wasn't love. This was panic wearing a grand gesture as a mask. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel, exhaling a shaky, hollow breath. The billboard lights flickered overhead, washing her car in white-blue flashes. She whispered, barely audible to herself, "That's not me, and that's not us." Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look, not yet. The truth was too loud, too bright, too exposed, and she wasn't ready to answer it. Not while her painting towered above her like a monument to everything she was trying to break free from. The garage was cold enough that Nora saw her breath. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the faint hum of ventilation. All of it echoed the sharpness of her steps as she crossed the space. Grant had just pulled in, the engine of his black SUV ticking as it cooled. He climbed out, straightening his jacket as if preparing for a board meeting rather than a conversation with his wife. He froze when he saw her. "Nora," he said cautiously, "I was going to call." "No, you weren't." Her voice carried, clean and sharp, bouncing off the concrete pillars. He shut the car door slowly. "I know the billboard surprised you," he began, "but I meant it as you use my face," she cut in, "to save yours." The word struck like a snapped cable whipping back. Grant inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." Fair. Nora stepped closer, chin lifted. "You didn't ask. You didn't warn me. You didn't even consider that maybe my art isn't a prop for your damage control." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence was an admission. She pressed on. "You didn't honor me, Grant. You exposed me. You put something private on a wall the size of a house so strangers could watch you play husband of the year. That's not what You wanted to fix the optics," she said. "You wanted people to stop whispering. You wanted investors to think you were balanced, anchored, family-focused. So you borrowed me. Again." His jaw clicked. "I was proud of you. Proud of your work. Then you could have said it to my face," she whispered, "instead of plastering it over a highway." The silence that followed was thick and sharp, filled with the things they'd never said out loud. Grant exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. Nora, I'm trying. I'm doing what I can. No. She shook her head. You're doing what you're used to. Huge gestures, high drama, spectacle, fixing everything in the loudest way possible. She took one breath, then another, then a third, hearing her therapist's voice in her head. Name what you need, out loud, without apology. So she did. I want you to come to one class. He blinked. What one art class? Sit in the back, listen, say nothing, don't interrupt, don't announce yourself. Just be there. 1 hour. To see the world I'm building. To see me. The version of me you keep missing. He stared at her as if she'd asked him to climb Everest. That's all he said. That's all. I can do that. He replied immediately, too quickly. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had promised many things before and forgotten half of them. But she wanted to believe him. Tomorrow night, she said, 7 o'clock. He nodded. I'll be there. Her throat tightened with a fragile, foolish hope she wished she could silence. The next day stretched long. Nora taught her students, prepped canvases, swept floors, and kept glancing at the studio door each time it creaked. Samuel worked quietly across the room, giving her space. He didn't ask about the billboard, didn't offer pity, didn't overstep, just presence. Something simple, something clean. By 6:30, the winter light had faded from the windows. She kept checking her phone, no messages from Grant. At 6:59, she looked up every time headlights passed the studio window. At 7:08, she told herself traffic might be bad. At 7:15, she told herself he might be parking. At 7:24, she told herself he might be looking for the entrance. At 7:31, she stopped telling herself anything at all. At 7:42, her phone buzzed. One message, flight to New York, emergency with the board, be back tomorrow, rain check. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. Around her, the soft scratching of brushes and charcoal filled the studio grounding. Real, alive. Samuel glanced at her, reading everything written on her face. But he didn't step in. He didn't need to. His silence was permission. His presence was a kind of steadiness she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. Her pulse steadied, her spine straightened. The disappointment, instead of crushing her, settled into something firmer, a quiet resolve. She walked to the back table where the mail pile sat waiting. A thin envelope was tucked between supply invoices. Her name typed neatly. The return address, Pierce Gallery, Baker District. She slid it open. Inside was a simple card. We would be honored to include your work in our upcoming group exhibition. Opening night, 3 weeks from Friday. Please confirm availability. S. Pierce. Her breath caught, not in shock, not in disbelief, in recognition. This was something she had earned, something no one had handed her, something no billboard could distort. She folded the card slowly, feeling the weight of its invitation, feeling something straighten inside her like a tree bracing out of winter. Samuel approached then, hands in his pockets. Good news? He asked gently. She looked up, eyes glimmering. A group show, she said, in Baker. His smile was small but proud. 3 weeks, that's big. Yes, she whispered, it is. Will you do it? He asked. The question didn't need thought. Yes, a breath, absolutely yes. She didn't need Grant's permission. She didn't need his applause. She didn't need to be his proof of life. She needed only this: a room full of light, a canvas waiting, and a future that belonged finally to her. Outside, a cold breeze swept down the alley. Inside, Nora reached for a fresh sheet of paper, her fingers steady. She wasn't painting for him. She wasn't painting for the billboard. She wasn't painting to be seen. She was painting because she had finally remembered how to breathe. And as the first line of charcoal touched the page, her phone buzzed again. Grant, no doubt, but she didn't reach for it. Not tonight. Not while her life was beginning to take shape, inch by inch, stroke by stroke, without him. The Baker district always looked different at night. Tonight, it felt alive. Warm bulbs glowed in strings above the brick sidewalks. Gallery windows shimmered with reflections of passing headlights. A soft hum of conversation drifted from doorways as people moved from one art space to another. Scarves pulled tight against the late winter cold. Inside, Pierce Gallery. The air buzzed with something gentler, anticipation threaded with reverence. Walls painted a soft bone white, floors gleaming, music low enough to breathe through. Nora stood near the entrance, her palms damp, her pulse unsteady. She'd dressed simply, black sweater, charcoal skirt, hair pinned back loosely. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just herself. Samuel moved through the space, adjusting spotlights by half an inch, checking wine glasses, greeting guests without theatrics, a steady anchor. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly when he reached her. "I have no idea," she said. "That's how you know you are," he replied. Behind them, her three paintings held a wall of their own, humble, but powerful under the soft gallery lights. Two plates. A woman seated at a lonely table. Two plates waiting, her posture a mixture of patience and grief. The balcony man. A charcoal rendering of a man leaning over a city railing, shoulders caving inward, suit rumpled, skyline stretching behind him like an accusation. The man resembled no one in particular, and yet, unmistakably, it was Grant, or the version of him she'd carried alone for years. Blueprint without a door, a stark architectural sketch, sharp angles, clean lines, but the floor plan lacked one thing: an exit. A home with no way out, a life built without space for the person inside it. People paused before each canvas, whispering observations, stepping closer, stepping back, looking again. That alone was enough to make Nora's vision blur with gratitude. She had wondered, for weeks, whether anyone would understand. Tonight she realized the truth. They felt it without needing to. A ripple near the door made her inhale sharply. Grant had arrived, late, as always. Tie loosened, as always. Energy tightly coiled, filling whatever space he walked into. He paused when he saw her. Something unguarded flickered in his face, awe, maybe, or the shock of realizing he'd missed entire continents inside the woman he'd shared a home with. "Nora," he said quietly. She nodded. "Thank you for coming." His gaze drifted past her to the wall. His expression changed, a slow, unsettled shift as he approached her paintings one by one. First, two plates. His throat bobbed. He knew exactly what it meant. Then, the balcony man. He stepped closer, studying the downward curve of the man's shoulders. "Is that supposed to be?" "It's how I saw you," she said. Back then, he didn't argue. He couldn't. Finally, blueprint without a door. He froze. The lines were unmistakable. The layout, the measurements. It mirrored one of his early builds, a home he'd designed years ago, down to the exact placement of the north-facing windows. "How did you?" he began. "I watched," she said. "More than you realized." He reached out, almost touching the frame but stopping himself. "You remembered every detail." "I lived with every detail," she said softly. "Long after you'd moved on to the next project, for the first time in years." Grant looked small, humbled, forced to stand still in a room that demanded more truth than he knew how to carry. Samuel approached then, calm as always. "Good evening, Grant," he said. There was no challenge in his tone, no rivalry, just courtesy. Grant nodded stiffly. "Samuel." The tension between them vibrated in the air, not aggressive, but unbearably human. Two men standing in the same light, seeing the same woman differently. Before anything more could be said, a donor walked over, a tall man in a camel coat with a champagne flute and a too loud voice. "Stunning work," he said, turning toward Nora. "Absolutely stunning. Tell me, did your husband fund these pieces? I imagine talent like this takes a certain financial cushion." Grant stiffened. Samuel's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Nora's heart didn't race. It steadied. She took a slow breath, then lifted her chin. "No," she said. voice clear enough to still the air around them. He didn't fund it. The donor blinked. Oh, my mistake. I funded this work with my life. The room quieted. Conversations hushed. Even the music seemed to pull back. She went on, her voice unwavering with years of silence, with ache, with everything I lost and everything I'm choosing to take back. These paintings aren't sponsored. They're survived. The donor stepped back, speechless. Grant's face drained not with anger, but with realization, the kind that hits slow and deep. His voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for her. I didn't know. I know, she replied gently. That's the point. Samuel didn't interrupt. He simply stood close enough for her to feel not protected but supported. Quietly, respectfully. More guests gathered around the canvases, drawn by the tension, the truth, the rawness in her words. Nora exhaled, slow and steady, not shaking, not shrinking, just standing. Grant stepped back from the crowd, hands in his pockets, eyes down. For the first time, he didn't try to fix the moment. He didn't defend. He didn't spin. He simply heard her, and that, somehow, hurt him more than anything she could have said in anger. Samuel leaned in, voice low. You did exactly what your work asked you to do. What's that, she asked. Tell the truth. She swallowed. Warmth spread across her chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just release. A painter whose work had lived in shadows was finally standing in her own light. And Grant, the man who once cast those shadows without noticing, stood watching her, unable to look away, realizing too late what he'd lost and what she'd found without him. She turned back to her paintings, breathing deeply. Tonight, the art was speaking. Tomorrow, the consequences would come. But for now, she let the room swell with truth. And somewhere behind her, a soft, shaky breath escaped Grant's lips, small, but unmistakable, the sound of a man finally breaking open. The Chrome Diner sat off Highway 285 like a leftover memory from another decade, neon sign humming. Parking lot half empty, windows fogged from the warmth inside. It was 12:15 m.c.m. when Nora pushed through the glass door. The bell chimed softly. Grant was already in a booth near the back, shoulders hunched, tie loosened, eyes shadowed in a way that had nothing to do with the dim light. A pot of coffee sat between two chipped mugs. Neither had been touched. He looked up when she approached. Nora, he whispered, as if her name hurt to say. She slid into the booth, not close, not far, just there. The waitress appeared with two menus, but Nora shook her head. Just coffee, she said, Grant murmured. Same. When the waitress left, silence settled, the kind that comes after a public truth has finally been spoken, and two people have nowhere left to hide. Forks clinked in the next booth. A radio played faint oldies near the register. The world felt strangely peaceful while theirs was coming undone. Grant rubbed a hand across his jaw. I didn't expect you to talk to me after the show. I didn't expect you to come, she replied. He gave a humorless, broken exhale. You asked me to see you. I owed you that much. She didn't argue. He wrapped his hands around the mug when the waitress refilled it, though he didn't drink. His thumbs pressed hard into the ceramic as if grounding himself. I need to tell you something, he said. She nodded once. He drew a breath that shook on the way out. I grew up poor, he began. Loveland, trailer home off a county road. Sometimes the heat worked, sometimes it didn't. My mom cleaned houses, my dad drifted. When things got bad, we'd sell whatever wasn't nailed down. Nora softened, not out of pity but recognition, pieces she'd never been given before. I used to think, he continued, voice thick, that if I just made enough money, everything would stop hurting. That fear would finally go quiet. He laughed, bitter. Turns out fear just changes clothes. What do you mean? She asked gently. He stared into the dark swirl of his coffee. Fear wears a suit now. It schedules itself. It calls itself work, but it's still fear. Fear of losing everything I built. Fear of being nothing again. Fear of someone seeing how small I really am inside all of this. He gestured vaguely. A motion that encompassed the house, the career, the persona. She listened in stillness, not to soothe him, not to fix him, just to hear him maybe, for the first time. When you started pulling away, he said softly, at first I didn't even notice. That's how blinded I was. Then when I finally realized, it felt like the ground cracking under me. And I panicked. Panicked people do stupid things. Like billboards. His mouth twisted. It wasn't stupid, Nora said quietly. It was desperate. He nodded, jaw tightening. Yes. The silence that followed wasn't sharp this time, just tired. They had both been tired for so long. After a long moment, he asked, "Is there something between you and Samuel?" Her eyes lifted to his, calm, clear. "No," she said. "Nothing crossed, nothing hidden." He swallowed. "But," she added, voice like a careful blade, "he made me feel visible." Grant closed his eyes, pained. "But that's not why I'm here tonight," she continued. "This isn't about choosing one man over another, or leaving you for someone else." "Then what is it?" he asked, barely audible. "It's choosing me," she said. Something in him deflated, not angry, not defensive, just grieving. "I don't want an affair," she said, firm but warm. "I don't want drama. I don't want revenge. I want a self, one I lost without even noticing." He looked at her then, truly looked as if seeing the outline of a woman he'd never bothered to trace in detail. "I didn't mean for you to disappear," he whispered. "I know," she said, "but I did." Bit by bit. Another beat passed. A truck rumbled outside. The bell above the door chimed as a couple entered. The world kept moving, gentle and indifferent. Nora wrapped her hands around her mug, the way he had earlier, grounding herself in warmth that was hers. Not borrowed. "Grant," she said softly, "I want a formal separation." He went perfectly still, not a flinch, not a gasp, just a silent, devastating stillness, the kind that follows a truth the heart already knew but hoped wouldn't be spoken. "This isn't punishment," she added. "It's protection." "For you?" he asked, voice cracking. "For both of us?" she said. "If we keep going the way we have, I'll lose myself again. And you'll keep mistaking fear for ambition. And neither of us deserves that." He blinked rapidly, as if trying to focus through a sudden blurring of everything he thought he knew. "Nora, I can change. You can try," she said gently. "And I hope you do, for your own sake. But I can't be the reason anymore. I can't be the project you fix when the rest of your life catches fire." His shoulders folded inward, the posture she had painted in The Balcony Man. She reached across the table, not to comfort him, but to offer something clean and respectful. Her hand rested on the formica surface, not touching his, just near. "This isn't a goodbye," she said. "Not yet. It's a boundary with a door instead of a wall." He closed his eyes, breath trembling. "And if I walk through it," he asked, "then it will be your choice," she said. "Not fears." The silence after that was quieter, sadder, but honest. The kind that clears a path. Outside, snow began to fall soft, drifting flakes catching the neon glow of the diner sign. They sat there a few minutes more, two people no longer fighting the truth, letting it settle like the snow on the hood of Grant's car. When Nora finally stood, she left her mug half full. He left his untouched, at the door. She paused, watching the snow swirl beyond the parking lot lights. She didn't turn when she said it, but her voice carried to the booth behind her. "I'm not disappearing again. Grant." The bell chimed as she stepped outside, swallowed by the quiet winter night, a woman walking toward a future she finally recognized as her own. Inside the diner. Grant bowed his head over the untouched coffee, the steam fading, the consequences settling. Tomorrow would hurt, but tonight, clarity had finally arrived. 6 months passed, the way weather does in Colorado, not in straight lines, but in shifting fronts. Cold spilling into warmth, warmth collapsing into snow, and then, suddenly, A day so bright it made you forget winter had ever existed. Nora learned to live inside those shifts. Her mornings began with the soft scrape of brush against canvas and the hiss of her kettle warming water for tea. The new apartment she'd rented near Sloan's Lake wasn't large, but sunlight moved through it as if the rooms had been waiting for her. White walls, hardwood faintly scarred, big windows that faced the water. It was enough, more than enough. She painted with her phone switched off. She answered only the calls she wanted. She kept the quiet she once had to fight for. And slowly, almost timidly at first, opportunities began to land at her doorstep. A curator from Santa Fe had seen her work online. Then a collector. Then a small museum that wanted one of her sketches for a rotating exhibition on modern regional artists. But that was only one side of the changing weather. The other side belonged to Grant. He did not evaporate from her life. He softened within it. Therapy 3 times a week at first, then twice. He delegated major projects, something he once swore he couldn't do without the sky falling. He learned to jog 3 miles without earbuds, his therapist's challenge. Learn to hear yourself before trying to be heard. The first week, he hated it. By the 4th, he told her over a calm, unpressured phone call that he'd started noticing the rhythm of his own breathing for the first time in years. His voice had changed. Fewer edges, more pauses, like a man slowly removing armor he had grown used to sleeping in. They did not talk often, but when they did, neither hurried the other. The official separation stood. The papers were filed, gentle and unlitigated, a mutual understanding rather than a battlefield. Samuel remained present in Nora's orbit, but not possessively, not romantically. At her Santa Fe solo show in late summer, he attended the opening night as a friend, arrived early, shook her hand at the door, the gesture warm but contained. He stepped aside so guests could speak with her, wandering the exhibit like any other patron, pausing thoughtfully before each canvas. He never took up more space than she offered, and that quiet respect was a kindness she felt in her ribs. The gallery was housed in an adobe building painted in sun-faded turquoise. Light moved through the high windows in golden sheets. Outside, the desert smelled of sage and warm dirt. Inside, her canvases hung like truths she had finally given permission to live. 2 plates, balcony man, house with no door, and 6 new works brighter, more expansive, harder to categorize. Her life had become bigger than the grief that shaped its early chapters. She stood near a sculpture when the gallery coordinator hurried to her side. "There's a line forming outside," the woman whispered, excited. "And I think one of them is here for you." Nora frowned gently. "For me? Yes." He's waiting politely. Wouldn't come in early even when we offered. She didn't know who she expected, but she didn't expect Grant. He stood near the end of the line, suit jacket in hand, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the late afternoon sun brightening the silver at his temples. He looked different, not younger, not defeated, just real. He carried a ticket in one hand, an admission ticket like everyone else. He didn't wave, didn't call her name, didn't try to cut the line or signal for special treatment. He simply waited, a man learning, finally, what it meant to show up the right way. When he reached the gallery entrance, he handed the ticket to the coordinator and stepped inside with quiet awe. His eyes swept the room first, not for her, but for the art. He approached her gently, stopping a respectful distance away. "Congratulations, Nora," he said, voice steady. "It's beautiful." She smiled a small, soft one. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, then slipped a folded paper into the donation box at the front desk. When the coordinator retrieved it later, it wasn't a check or a flashy gesture. It was a purchase slip. He'd bought the smallest piece in the entire show, a postcard-sized study of shifting morning light, done in soft graphite and blue wash. He'd written on the bottom margin, "I didn't want to take a large work from someone who needs your voice on their wall. This one is enough. I'm learning to look. Gee." When Nora found it, her breath caught not with heartbreak, and not with longing, with something calmer, kinder, recognition, maybe. He had not come to reclaim her. He had come to witness her. Later, After the crowd dispersed and Samuel escorted the last patrons out with quiet goodbyes, Nora returned to the studio space set up behind the gallery. A blank canvas waited, tall, white, open. The smell of gesso still clung to it. She stood before it, heart steady. On the table beside her was her phone, turned off. By the window sat her brushes, waiting. She dipped the first one into a thin wash of gold and, without overthinking it, she made the first stroke of her next work, House with the Lights On. A home that wasn't a trap, a door that opened both ways. A place built not from fear or scarcity or performance, but from presence, from truth. She stepped back, letting the colors settle. Outside, the desert wind shifted, carrying the scent of dusk. Inside, she breathed evenly. Her life wasn't fixed. Her future wasn't certain. Her heart wasn't claimed, but she was here, visible to herself, present in the room, brush lifted, lights on, and for the first time in years, she felt the future arrive quietly, not as a storm, or a threat, or a verdict, but as weather changing, naturally, gradually, beautiful in its timing. Nora dipped her brush again. The next stroke waited. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in the quiet moment when we finally tell ourselves the truth. Nora didn't become stronger because someone saved her. She became stronger the moment she stopped asking to be seen and chose instead to see herself. And Grant didn't begin to change because she begged him to. He changed when life grew quiet enough that he could finally hear the parts of himself he'd spent years outrunning. Maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden inside their story, that love is not proven in grand gestures or perfect timing, but in presence, in the small, steady acts of choosing each other and choosing ourselves with honesty. And even when two paths drift apart, it doesn't mean the story failed. Sometimes distance gives us the space to grow into the people we were meant to become. If you're walking through a season of loneliness, of change, or of rediscovering your own voice, I hope you remember this. You are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. And you are allowed to build a future that feels like a house with the lights on. Thank you for spending this time with us, and for letting this story rest in your heart for a little while. Your presence here means more than you know. Every like, every share, every subscribe, it isn't just support for the channel. It's a way of carrying these gentle human stories out into the world, a way of reminding someone out there that they're not alone, not forgotten, not invisible. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that touch the soul.